Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I am your host, Royce White, and I am here at Free People Radio in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today, we bring you another family and friends guest. Today's guest is none other than the great Kristina Karamo from the state of Michigan. Kristina Karamo ran for Secretary of State in the state of Michigan and was unsuccessful, but fought back to become the chair of the Republican Party there in Michigan. Her populist and nationalist views are of great controversy if you read the headlines from mainstream media. She's been called many things, such as an extremist, a conspiracy theorist, a Donald Trump lover, a radical, someone who believes that satanic ritual and satanic practice is at work in our government and in our nation and in our communities. Something that I would wholeheartedly agree with as well. Hence the show, Please Call Me Crazy. Kristina is somebody who has obviously been made to seem like she's crazy, which is why we felt it was important and beneficial for you to hear from Kristina herself and let her tell you her story and her beliefs straight from her mouth, not from some third-party corrupt media institution. And so we brought you Kristina Karamo today, and I'm excited. She's one of the bright and shining stars up and coming in politics, not only for the great state of Michigan, but also for our entire country. When you represent one group of people in times like today, you end up representing all free people. Without further ado, the great Kristina Karamo. When I heard about Kristina's victory, I thought to myself, this is exactly what Americans all across this country have to strive to do. What a courageous and valiant effort to first run for an elected office as a black woman, as a Republican, in a country where 91% of black women vote Democrat, or at least they voted for Joe Biden, 91%. And to take defeat, not give up, come back and become the chair of the party, and now be the tip of the spear for the Republican Party there in Michigan. Welcome to the show, Kristina. We are thankful to have you here. We are appreciative of your efforts there in Michigan. And before we get into all of that good stuff, because I know this could end up being a nuclear interview for sure between you and I. We're two people that the establishment calls extreme. Just to give you guys a little backstory right here. You know, when you go to Wikipedia, I mean, Wikipedia is in many ways one of the most dangerous sources of misinformation that is widely used in our society today. And if you go to Wikipedia and you look up our good friend, the great Kristina Karamo, the first sentence in her bio or in her summary is telling of where we are in American politics and where we are with media today. Kristina Karamo is an American far-right politician. I mean, they don't even waste any time. And then they go on to say Karamo is a staunch proponent of the disproven conspiracy theory. It's already been disproven that Donald Trump won Michigan and the national election in 2020. So this is, and you know, Kristina, for all of my listeners and people who follow me in the movement, we read stuff like that and we know automatically that this is the machine trying to tell us who we should and shouldn't believe, often because they have something important to tell us, which is why you're on the show today. And I'm excited to hear what you really have to say about a lot of issues. But I'd like to start with, and I always like to start with, who Kristina Karamo was before Kristina Karamo. Where'd you grow up? What was your family life like? God, no God? Tell us the Kristina Karamo backstory to get us going here today.
Again, thank you for having me on, Royce. I really appreciate it. So I guess I'm just the average citizen. I'm just a fed up citizen. And I just never believed in just sitting back and letting things happen. I believe that I have a duty to speak up when I see something wrong. And it's just kind of in my nature to fix things. Like if I see something I don't like or I see something I want, I'm gonna go after it. That's just I think there's a combination of things that make me the way I am. My mother, who she passed away, I miss her dearly. She always taught me to question everything,
Mm.
and I always make a joke that I know I was annoying to raise. I know I was obnoxious because Can you imagine a teenager who does this by nature, or not just a teenager, a kid who asks questions about everything, like why? That was always me. Plus, my dad would take us to at the time Borders bookstore. Borders is out of business now, but we would go to the bookstore and we would buy books all the time. So you take inquisitiveness plus curiosity, which those overlap to a certain extent, and you put that together, that creates a person who always wants to know. Like, I always want to learn something new. So I'm never bored. I can't think of the last time I was bored, because there's always something I want to do. So if one thing bores me, I'll just move on to the next thing that's exciting. And that's just kind of my personality. And if you have that being restrained by scripture, it can produce something positive. And I say that as a Christian, because if it's not restrained by scripture, it can be something horrible. That's how you have people who are self-destructive and engage in other, unhealthy behaviors. But as a Christian, you have that constrained by scripture. And that just kind of creates an individual who constantly wants to improve for the glory of God. I strongly believe that's why all of us exist, for the glory of God. We don't exist for ourselves, we exist for his purposes. I've
Amen.
always been interested in politics, because it has such an impact on our lives. Um, and that's since I was a kid, I was interested in politics. I remember I'm 37. I remember the Desert Storm War, and I was in the kindergarten when that happened, and that stood out to me because I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of kids from Iraq, and so that stuck out to me. And I remember the Rodney King situation. I remember the L.A. riots. I remember the '92 presidential election. I just, for some bizarre reason, I've just always gravitated to politics.
Mm.
And just as I got older, it's kind of interesting, Royce. I grew up in a liberation theology church. Yeah, and you would see a person who's a conservative now who grew up in a liberation theology church. But what happened is the things that I would hear in church did not match my reality, if that makes any sense. You hear something in church, and I'm like, well, when I leave out of here, this isn't matching up with what I see every day. Fortunately, some people, when that occurs, they become atheists. I did not, because my mom pushed back against the church. We
Mm.
had Joycelyn Elders in our church. If anyone knows who she was the Surgeon General under Bill Clinton, and she was promoting abortion in our pulpit. And I will never forget the collective gasp from the members in the church. But my mom and dad, after that occurred, plus there was a speaker who said homosexuality was okay. He did not in those exact words, which we know violates scripture. God is very clear that He made one man, one woman to be together for life. And people have a right to live how they want, but I'm a Christian and I'm gonna stay consistent with what the Bible teaches. With that being said, and this was in the '90s. This was in the mid '90s, and my parents were like, "Enough is enough," and they left the church. And
Mm.
we started looking for a new church home. And then around that time began to kind of progress. And I just remember I always watched politics for some bizarre reason. Like, I remember the war in Bosnia Herzegovina. I remember, just I could go on and on and on about these political events that I remember. But the one defining moment was 9/11. And 9/11 was a very defining moment in my life and the way I viewed the world. And I got more interested in politics, and then I became more political. But the issue that had me as a conservative would be the issue of abortion. We all have a right to live. I mean, if we don't have a right to life, we're nothing. And we have become like a death cult, our society. We've embraced a death cult. It's just sick that people celebrate the ability to kill their children. And it's human sacrifice. It's no different than the pagan societies of old, when people would offer up their children to Baal and Molech. It's the same concept. If you sacrifice your child to this god, then you'll get money, you'll get rain, fertile crops, whatever it is that this person is wanting. This is why they sacrifice their children, and that's no different than we are today. So I can go on and on and on, but it's kind of odd that politics just has always been so weaved in my life. I can't remember a time that I wasn't interested in politics. It's just that my level of involvement has increased. And for people who aren't interested in politics, I always point out that, that sign in your neighborhood that says you can't park here, Sunday from 9 a.m., 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. or what have you. That's politics. That was a city ordinance. There isn't an aspect of your life that isn't controlled by politics, even the thoughts in your mind. And so, considering that politics has such a massive impact on our lives, how can we not care? So I guess that's my backstory. But I just have always,
Yeah.
politics has shaped me tremendously, and it's fascinating because you can watch how people operate, how the lengths they're willing to go to for the name of power, the atrocities. When I was in theology school, I went to theology school. I have a master's in Christian apologetics, and my one of my professors said that people commit crimes for three reasons: that's money, power, and sex. You see all that in politics, where people will engage in the most atrocious actions for all three of those things. And those individuals who are engaging in these atrocious actions have power over our lives. So
Mm.
I strongly believe that righteous people need to stand up and fight back and occupy these spaces, not so we can throw up our hands in victory, but so we can actually help people's lives. Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, if you're not in this to help people's lives, why are you here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, amen to that. So you grew up in the church. You grew up in a more conservative and faithful, religious Christian family. What where exactly again? I don't know if I caught that. I
I'm
was
from Michigan. I'm from
what
Oakland County, Michigan. So I'm
Oakland
right
County.
outside of
Okay.
Detroit. Right outside of
Okay.
Detroit. It's kind of funny. In Detroit, it's like this thing, like you don't claim you're from the city if you're not really living in the city. So, but I'm from the Detroit area. Like people are real territorial about that. But I grew up and live in Metro Detroit. I mean, Michigan is a great state. Our state is automotive was our strong industry here. My dad is a retired automotive worker, and us in Michigan, we've watched the decline of America firsthand because the automotive engine that powered America obviously powered Michigan. And for a long time, you could have a man work and care for his family, and that was sufficient to provide a stable middle class lifestyle.
Mm.
Now, I know this kind of going down a rabbit hole, but it's important.
No,
Now
please.
we created a society where both people have to work. So then
Yeah.
who's raising the children? TV, media, and entertainment industry. Now kids are more depressed, they're more suicidal, they have more problems because now mom can't raise her kids. Now the TV has to because mom has to go and work. So that two parent family, that structure where it was optional for mom to work, which was marketed to us as oppressive and trying to deny women the opportunity to have funds, actually was beneficial because if it protected the family structure. I mean, we could really go down a rabbit hole from the time women have been essentially forced to work, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term, how it's causing a breakdown in families,
Well,
how it's
yeah.
causing health problems. I mean, think about it.
I
When a
mean,
family can eat a
you
whole
wait. Hang on. Christina's coming. You're clicking on all cylinders right out of the gate. I gotta slow you down because number one, it's hard for me. It's exciting for me, but also it's hard for me to even see, and I'm hopeful too. I don't want to negate that. I'm hopeful to see a black woman who's in my age group, right? Understand these things and be able to speak to them in such an articulate and convicted manner. And I mean, just before you go on, and we're going to be able to get to all of the things that you want to discuss, and especially this, because I think I did an episode recently on women in Marxism, and I talked about the fundamental philosophy, the prevailing university thought, the prevailing ideological thought that drove this women's movement and drove the family apart and drove people away from God and the natural order in the earliest days of its walking around. But just tell me, what it's been like for you as a young black woman to have these thoughts and to believe what you believe, to see what you see. It's a fact. All of these things are a fact that you're saying, but navigating your relationships within the black community, specifically with other black women, because for me, I feel like black men, we are kind of ghosts politically. We often follow what our women do. We also often follow what we believe will be romantically beneficial in our politics. Follow our woman, follow our girlfriend, these kinds of things. But if you get all the boys together and you have a real conversation about political issues or ideas, you'll get a far different answer than is portrayed in the public. So I think men have it even easier. Black men, I'm saying, have it even easier. As a black woman, though, these issues are very, very stratified in one direction. I mean, what you're saying now makes you effectively a unicorn. What has it been like for you personally? What have you had to what have you had to sacrifice personally to believe and speak about these issues in the way that you do?
I think, well, I will say I try to speak about it in a very rational, evidence-based way. I don't. I really have got more blowback from my political stances as being like a Republican more so than my stance regarding the human family and social order. I mean, a little
Mhm.
bit in college I did. I would get into these debates with people and it would frustrate me because they would say, you're trying to keep women back. I'm like, actually, we get triple duty when you're forced to have to. I mean, women have the highest rates of like heart disease and obesity and all these other health problems that so many women deal with because you still have to get up every day and go to work. You still have to cook and clean. You still have to raise kids. So actually, as women, we're losing. So it's not a benefit. And they say it's empowerment, but then why are so many women having so many health problems? Because we're doing too much. But as a millennial, we have been conditioned that this is the way. I think in the millennial generation that there's going to be a shift, a little paradigm shift, and it may be I'm in a bubble. I don't know. I could be in a bubble, but I will say I think there is a somewhat of a shift because I've talked to many women in my generation who realized we were sold a lie. You know, as the millennial generation get older, we're like we were sold a complete lie.
Yeah.
We bought into the feminist movement. We bought into the lies when we were in our 20s, and now that we got older, we realized we were tricked. And many of us are now on this kind of quest to teach younger girls and boys too that the secularist lies, there's an agenda behind it, which is a whole nother conversation. But the secularist lies are just they to destroy. And oftentimes when I have these conversations with friends, it's people who've experienced the consequences of these feminist lies. And then they go, yeah, girl, that was, it was a lie.
That was a
So I
lie.
guess as I guess it's the people I surround myself with. We've come to
Yeah.
the same conclusions, so I don't get a lot of pushback. Um, so I haven't. But when it comes to my politics, my other outside of like the family structure and social order, I get more people to agree with me. But when I start getting like Republican politics and conservative philosophies and being pro-America, that's when I get the pushback. But
Yeah.
because oftentimes you can point to just evidence, when I point to the fact that we have, higher rates of heart disease, or we get into like, the diets that are in our communities. When you start getting into those things, I mean, how any honest person disagree? It's kind of like you can't. So, so that's a really interesting question because I haven't experienced. And then even when I take that back, when I was maybe a little bit younger, maybe like 10 years ago, I would get some pushback. But then now that I'm 37 and my friends are starting to see some of the consequences for the decisions they made, they come back and go, "Oh, Christina, you were right." I'm like, I know I was. So so I haven't got a lot of pushback because I think again, our age group is starting to realize we were sold a lie. It's a book called Female Chauvinist Pigs by a woman named, I think her name is Ariel Levy, but the book is called Female Chauvinist Pigs and the Rise of Raunch Culture. And this book is so powerful because I would argue the author and I are both ideologically very different politically and probably spiritually. But what we did agree on that the objectification of women was sold to us as feminism and it was just a lie. And
Yeah.
I think that is what more and more women are starting to pick up on. So it's kind of interesting. It may be a bubble that I'm in, but I haven't particularly got a lot of blowback from my comments and my beliefs on the human family and social order. It's more my other political beliefs that cause the problems.
in a previous episode, in this episode about women and Marxism, I made the claim, or I forwarded the idea, that it was strange for me as a young black man who came from a community where you had all manners of things that are in black communities all across the country. You had gangs, you had drugs, you had pimps and prostitutes, and there's a culture there that exists, a sort of underground criminal culture that isn't secluded to black communities, but black communities have their own sort of version, as do others. um, but it was funny. I said that it's real funny to see a narrative grow since I was a young man. I was born in '91. But even throughout the '90s and the rise of hip hop culture, and a narrative grow where women effectively had been oppressed, not just by a patriarchy, corporate America, and a sort of systemic oppression from men, white Christian men, is what they were really saying. I didn't know that when I was a 10-year-old, but I figured it out in short order. Um, but even from a grassroots standpoint, a communal standpoint, that the black man who was a pimp, let's say, was being oppressive to black women in the neighborhood, or any number of male figures in the neighborhood were being oppressed to black women, and it was all based around this sexual objectification argument, that women are more than sexual objects. And that was a strong movement when we were coming up, during the late '90s, 2000s, probably even towards late 2008, 2009, right when Obama rolled in. It was already They were already poking holes in it, but it was still strong. And then all of a sudden it became, there's no other option. I'm going to objectify myself as long as I can be the CEO, my own CEO, in doing it, right? And that's kind of what the internet and social media led to, and now no greater example than OnlyFans. And I made a joke the other last week, and I said, you guys traded a pimp on the corner who was wearing gaiters and one pocket slacks for some pimp in an ivory tower who's doesn't need to get walk around money. He doesn't need to do cash pickups. He's just doing credit card transactions on a monthly subscription basis. You're still a prostitute. I mean, you're still being sexually objectified. You've just rationalized that it's okay because you've gone to some subscription model where the rest of us don't necessarily see you walking on the corner, but that doesn't mean that you aren't. Can you talk a little bit about your run in politics now, or your involvement in politics now, as it pertains to the greater circumstance of women, and particularly young women, in this sort of social media world that's been growing?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm still trying to figure out where I'm gonna land and what all my role is, because I'm just going, if it makes sense. Like, I see a problem, let's fix it. That's how our team operates. It's a problem, let's fix it. It's a problem, let's fix it. What I hope to encourage and inspire is a generation of women who will be question askers, who will be willing to ask the tough questions and analyze, and not just ingest what we're told. People in just general who want to listen and learn before speaking and observe. I'm still trying to figure out where I fit in all this, because this wasn't a plan, if that makes sense. This was like, I'm like the accidental, I don't know, the accidental chair. Like, this whole everything is an accident. So, to provide some context for people, I did not plan on any of this. Like, I just had a lot of things that happened in my life as an adult. Not a child. I had a fantastic childhood, great parents. It was just actually my 20s was like a rocky period in my life. But nevertheless, I found myself. I'm a mother. I'm teaching, and here I am. God had put it on my heart to study apologetics. And apologetics, Christian apologetics, is a very specific Christian discipline where we defend the Christian faith against objections. 1 Peter 3:15, where it talks about that if someone asks for a reason as to why you believe, be prepared to give them an answer. And even to take a step back further, when I would say maybe 2016, or maybe even prior to 16, I would say maybe actually 2014, I began to examine my life and my friends' lives. And I came to the conclusion that the issues in our lives were a direct result of rebellion against God. And
Mm.
people don't they don't understand it that way. But if we read the Bible, I mean, God gives great advice. I know that sounds like a silly statement, but it's really just true. And as you read scripture and you begin to examine culture, and you see like all these problems, if people just follow God, they wouldn't even happen. Most of the problems, we still would have some natural evil, weather, disease, accidents, but many of the problems in our lives are a direct result of rebellion against God. And as I began to read scripture, I began to learn and understand that. So let's fast forward. I began to study apologetics, and I began to study formally. And as I was studying apologetics, I simultaneously still was very politically active. I got active in the Republican Party in college, but took a small hiatus because I was married and had children. And then after a certain time, I got active again, and I just was active on the county level, my district, my state. I just was kind of just active because our civic duty does not end at the ballot box. And I became the spokeswoman for my county party. And again, I'm just an activist. I'm just doing my civic duty, trying to be informed and inform others. And I earned my master's in Christian apologetics. So I actually was in the process of starting a Christian media company. It's the funny part. So I'm a college instructor. I'm starting a Christian media company and I ran a Christian podcast called Solid Food. And it was kind of comical in the sense that the logo for my podcast was a bunny on the table with a fork and a knife with an oversized Bible, because it's like, the scripture talks about, babies drink milk, but the mature believer eats solid food. And so it's like we're going to go down the rabbit hole while holding on to our Bibles, because sometimes as we try to dissect and understand the craziness we see, people can go too far off into just believe in really wild things. So we want to stay sober minded as we try to understand the world around us, and stay as sober minded requires us to hold on and study and feast on the word of God. So that was what I was focused on, and this media content. But I want to create entertaining media content, because unfortunately a lot of Christian media is very boring, and it preaches to the choir. It doesn't serve the purposes of evangelism, because I want to create highly entertaining content that caused the viewer to walk away convicted. That was my goal. And I, finished theology school. I got my podcast going. I'm trying to kind of get this Christian project going, and I'm active in the Republican Party, and I'm a very conservative individual. And so the 2020 election came, and I was one of the poll challengers in Detroit during the 2020 presidential election, and I witnessed firsthand election fraud. And not just a little bit of fraud. I mean, it was well organized. It was unbelievable. Like it brought. I was so emotional that after I left the TCF Center, I was crying, and I'm going to explain why. For people who don't understand, they may what people don't understand about folks like me when it comes to politics. I am not in a cult or some kind of fan club for any person or politician. We live in a representative democracy, if you will. Okay, that's what we're a republic. But the reason why I put the two together is because we have representation. We elect people through a democratic process to represent our wishes. And when we lose the ability to pick people who will represent our wishes, tyranny is on the horizon. And what's around that corner
Absolutely.
is horrible. That means we, the people, have lost control over our government, and anybody can get in office and do anything to us. That's just a fact. They can do whatever they want to us. And that's what I was thinking about. I'm like, we just watched them commit massive, massive election fraud. I mean, I watched it happen. And the crazy part is when we came out, the media called us liars. That was the surreal part. Imagine witnessing something and the local news go, "You did not see that. That didn't happen. You guys are just a bunch of Donald Trump sycophants." And not even like it's not even about him at this point. It's about us. It's that we voted for somebody to make decisions that impact my life, and now you put someone else in. I mean, come on, folks. Joe Biden literally said on camera, it's a video of him where he stated, "We have the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics." He said that, complete Freudian slip. And so it's reason it goes to your question. And so I see all this, and the media just berated us and called us liars. And I remember reading one news article where they said, "Oh, Republican poll challengers weren't kicked out of the TCF Center," and I'm like, I watched it happen. I
Okay,
watched
so walk us through a little bit of what you, because we got time. We got time here. We're about 30 minutes in. This is already jaw dropping, and I'm excited for our listeners. I hope everybody's enjoying it as much as I am. I'm a huge fan of Christina Karamo, so if I look a little giddy in the jowls here, that's why. Um, and Michigan was obviously a very hot point in this 2020 election, and will continue to be a hot point going forward. Which is why I assume you had the impulse to run for Secretary of
oh,
State to try and get the reins around the voting integrity there. But take me to 2020 at TCF Bank Stadium. Because like I said, if I look at these, I got notes here. We got articles from any number of globalist mainstream media industrial complex institutions, and all of them will tell me the exact same thing, right? Christina Karamo's crazy. Christina Karamo is a far right conspiracy theorist. She's a Donald Trump darling of the alt right, and blah blah blah. Same thing they say about me, which helped me know right away this is somebody I got to talk to. This is somebody I got to team up with, right? And before I go there, there is what is disconcerting to me, or what is disconcerting or concerning, is how many of our fellow black people in the country would rather, and I don't say this to be pejorative or denigrating or demeaning, but when the shoe fits, right? A lot of our people would rather follow individuals who only sell them materialism, satanic, evil, radical materialism, getting high, getting drunk, being violent. A lot of our young black people would rather follow those individuals. A lot of our young black women would rather follow those individuals. And the mainstream media here, by intent, is keeping young black women from seeing somebody like you, and having you go, you know, green out there on the wire for young women to look up to. So I know what this will say. I want to know what it looked like there at TCF Stadium during the 2020 election from your lens.
yeah. So when one of the things we saw, I would say there were lots of things that went wrong, lots of things that didn't make sense. Some of the processes. So let me step back. Our elections, the corruption in our election system is the biggest threat we face, because again, it's about us having control over our government. That's fundamental. If you read our Declaration of Independence, it states that governments instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And the only way we give our consent is through voting. There's only one way to maintain or seize power: voting or war. That's it, ballot or bullet. That's it. It's just no other way. So, with that being said, the fact that we live in a country where we can just cast a vote, that's why we've lived in relative peace. If you study human history, peace is not the constant state of man, is war. And so they've always been at each other's throats with swords and guns. We've been blessed to live in a country where I could just go and cast my vote and just submit a piece of paper saying who I like, and that's the end of it. So that process has been overly complicated intentionally. That way, the average person doesn't understand how our election system works. So that's kind of the problem, because oftentimes when you say, we'll be like, well, what all did you see? It's like, well, first I got to step back and give you like a 20-minute speech on how elections actually work for people to
No,
understand
please
went
start
wrong.
there.
So
No,
a
start
couple
there.
things were wrong. We saw ballot duplications that were duplicated outside the law. They would make this excuse that they need to duplicate ballots because they were at the wrong absentee counting board, which is, again, the law only states that ballots are supposed to be duplicated if they're either soiled, torn, or ripped or something like that. If it's like damage to the ballot where it can't go into the machine, not for being at the wrong precinct. When they were duplicating military ballots, the ballots were coming back on standard ballot form, which isn't necessarily illegal, but it's not practical for a clerk to do that. So, for example, what we call a uniform overseas voter. If you got somebody stationed in Afghanistan, the clerk is not going to mail this person a ballot and then hope they mail it back. because there's only a 40-day window when the ballot is printed to the time the voter has to return it. Think about mailing a ballot to Afghanistan. I'm using that as an example simply because the clerk does not have the mailing address of the soldier, because the soldier could be anywhere. You have to mail it to their base, and the base gets it to the soldier in the field. So you don't have, and then that soldier would need to mail it back to the clerk. That's not a practical process. So what happens is that the soldier downloads something from a copy of their ballot from online, and then they got 40 days to make sure it gets back to the clerk. So with that being said, so it's not technically illegal for a soldier to have a standard ballot form. It's just not practical, and it's expensive because the cost for a clerk to mail a bunch of ballots overseas is going to be expensive compared to the soldier just mailing it back. Does that make sense logistically? It just
Yeah.
doesn't add up. So those are things that just didn't make sense. But I saw also what I saw was actually illegal was we have something in Michigan where they use an adjudication process, but that's also technically an illegal process. But once again, when people point to these things that are illegal in our election process, everyone just calls you a bigot, or they call you, say you don't know what you're talking about. You need to listen to the experts. So there was a particular ballot that came on the screen, and the way the adjudication process was working is that if it's an overvote, or the machine can't discern the will of the voter, or it's a write-in, you get two people, one Republican, one Democrat, who look at the ballot, and then they discern how the voter voted, which that's totally problematic in and of itself, but I digress. So a ballot came on the screen, the voter voted for Joe Biden and the Green Party candidate for president. And the adjudicator really quickly just gave the vote to Joe Biden, which was completely illegal because that person nullified their vote. So if it's an overvote, that's it. That's it for that race. The way it works is that instead of the entire ballot being thrown out, the machine will highlight the problematic race, count the rest of the ballot, and just void out that race if it's an overvote. So then shortly after that, another ballot comes on the screen. The voter voted for straight party ticket Democrat, straight party ticket Republican, and they filled in the oval completely. They made no other marks on the ballot. And so the fact that the voter filled in both completely, that let me know that they did this on purpose. And so the adjudicator goes, I think I'm going to give it to the Democrats. And I'm like, no, because that ballot was supposed to be tossed out because it was an overvote.
Mm.
Because they intentionally voted for both parties. So then I go get her supervisor, and she goes, I don't know. What do you think? And I'm just like, what do you mean? Like, y'all run the election, y'all don't know what to do. Like, this makes no sense. So then I go get the guy overseeing the entire TCF center. He comes down, and I explain the situation to him. And it's not as though I'm explaining it as though he should be confused. I'm explaining it in a way that it's no way he can come to any other conclusion that this ballot is to be discarded or tossed out, should be counted. And he goes, I don't know. What do you think? He said the same thing after I explained it, like these people rehearse their lines. And so then I said, okay. I said, well, why not give it to the Republicans instead of the Democrats? And I was asking it in a rhetorical way for them to kind of think within themselves and help point out the differences. And the
Yeah.
man just began screaming at me and yelling at me. And him and I got into an argument. And he told her, push it through it. And that's what she did. She counted the votes. So that was two illegal votes. I personally went in for Joe Biden. And that's just what I personally saw in my own two eyes. There also were people who showed up at like 10 o'clock who had these matching outfits on. And they had on these matching outfits, and they were, walking around, and they were intimidating people. I saw them when I was at the adjudication screen, where they were telling this woman, like, get back, doing little things like that, antagonizing people, ballots showing up in the middle of the night. And we had a journalist here in Michigan turn around and claim no ballot showed up in the middle of the night. This guy's a prominent journalist, who a lot of people trust, and he claimed no ballot showed up in the middle of the night. And it's like myself and a whole lot of other people watched it happen. We watched the ballot show up in the middle of the night. And then he tried to dismiss it like no ballot showed up. And then maybe about 6-7 months later, surveillance video came out from the TCF center of the ballot showing up. I mean, so it was beyond what we witnessed. It was the cover up. And then the next day, people were trying to get in because they intentionally, wouldn't allow a sufficient number of Republican poll challengers to be in that we were allowed to have by law. And they like chain the inside of the door shut. I mean, I can go on and on, put up greasy pizza boxes or kicking out our challengers. It was just problem after problem after problem after problem. But a lot of the corruption happens before it even got to that point. It's when they dump in all these fraudulent registrations. So, it goes on and on and on, all of the problems we saw. And the kicker part was when we came out and started alerting the public. And as I mentioned, the media called us a liar. But the biggest ones fighting me was my own party. Was my own party. And that's
The
what made
Republican
a lot of us.
establishment.
Yeah, yeah, they are. They're frauds.
The
And
Republican establishment there in Michigan?
I was,
Or was it the RNC?
well, it's a combination. It's a combination of all of them. Because the thing about it is there is a political class who there's a couple of different types of groups. You got one group of people who are just loyal to the party. They're party people. Whoever's the party, they are party. They like, I'm loyal to the party. So if you got a good person, they're loyal to that person. If you got a bad person, they're loyal to that person. They're just party people. Then you actually have controlled opposition. And that's what has infected Michigan, controlled opposition. And the reality is that these people, they just hated Donald Trump. They hated the conservative movement. And they wanted to squash any semblance of him, plus squash any semblance of any type of conservative, the populist movement. And that populist movement was huge. And so what they did afterwards was to suppress, they wanted no discussion of election fraud, move on. You can't talk about anything else. And again, it was not about one particular person. It was about our right to representation. Because if they were doing this in the presidential election, my goodness, I'm sure they were doing these types of corruption in other elections. And as a matter of fact, Royce, we got a video from 2013, a mayor's race in Detroit, where it was a group of Detroiters who went to what was called, they changed the name all the time, but TCF, the same location, they changed the name at the time. But anyway, they were down at the TCF Center. 2013 was called Cobo Hall at the time. And these citizens were trying to get a copy, I'm not trying to take a number account of the ballots and the ballot stubs, because those numbers should match. So let's say you want someone who wants to rerun ballots over and over and over again. The way you prevent that is to get the count for ballots and the count for ballot stubs. Those numbers should match. And these groups of people, they were trying to get the right numbers for the ballots, get the count for the ballots and the ballot stubs, and the election workers kicked them out. So this wasn't just 2020. This was going on 2019. I'm sorry, not 2017. Our current lieutenant governor, he ran for clerk of Detroit, complaining about the corruption, asked for a recount. 2019, 2021. Tom Barrow, he ran for mayor of Detroit, complaining about them intentionally frustrating precincts to prevent a recount. So this wasn't just 2020. They've been doing this for a long time. It's just that 2020 was so brazen that I personally started getting interested. And then I had my own party fighting back. And I'm like, if we don't have fair elections, we have no control of our government. So I said, I guess I'm going to run to fix the election system. So that's what happened. So again, this is why I say it was an accident, because this was not as though like this, I had like a calculated political career. Like, no,
Yeah.
I just saw a problem. I was mad. I'm like, I'm going to fix it. And so then I wound up becoming a Republican nominee for Secretary of State. There's a whole lot in that. And then after that, my own party was sabotaging me during my SOS race. And I go, like no candidate should ever experience that again. So I ran for chair of the party. And here I am.
So you run for Secretary of State, and in your run for Secretary of State, were you voicing a lot of these opinions, and did you run on this platform that you are now? And was that a lot of the pushback that came from the main establishment Republicans there in Michigan? Is that what you mean when you say you were railroaded by your own party?
Oh yeah. Well, let's take a step back further, Royce. We had a Senate Oversight Committee back in 2021, and they came out with a report claiming there was no widespread fraud in the election. Now, which is completely false. I mean, a bunch of us witnessed it with our own two eyes. I don't care what some committee report said, but the kicker part was the chair of the Oversight Committee. He put in his report that our Attorney General should consider criminally investigating people alleging fraud in the election. Now, that's unconstitutional.
What year was this?
This is 2021. After the 2020 election, and all of us were complaining, the chair of our Senate Oversight Committee put out a report saying that our Attorney General, who's a total Marxist, should consider criminally investigating people who allege fraud in the election. Now, number one, I have a right to petition my government for a redress of grievances. What happened to my freedom of speech? And our Attorney General, we have her on film threatening me with the felony stating that I was potentially engaging in a felony and could be criminally charged for speaking truth about election fraud. This is
What's the
how
felony? What was the felony they were claiming? That you were
there's
inciting violence?
no, no, she was claiming that I was suppressing people's right to vote by scaring them away from voting, which is crazy. There's no such crime. This is
That
the
by that you calling question of the integrity of the election altogether, you're actually disincentivizing people from voting.
that's her
That's
claim.
that's a felony.
Yeah, that is an illicit prosecution. Me and this woman had listen. Our attorney general, I've trolled her.
Let's say this woman's name. What's this woman's name?
Dana Nessel. Dana Nessel. That's the attorney general. I've trolled her and she fell in my trap once before. And she probably watching this right now. She's probably looking for a way to try to drum up some illicit prosecution because these people don't like truth tellers. They like uniparty politicians. And I'm not uniparty. So, there's that. But that when our own Republican Party put out that report, that caused a massive schism in the party where it's just like you got the populist people like me who are all about putting America first, and then you have all these other people who are just about corporations. And I say that as a capitalist, I'm not against corporations. I'm not. What I am against is globalism, where a lot of these people make their wealth from CCP companies and overseas exploitation. And so this is how they make their wealth, where we're like, okay, this is why you guys call yourself pro-business. No, you're not pro-business. You're pro-globalist because your policies actually kill small businesses, which are necessary for my liberty. So you're not pro-business. You're just pro-CCP and globalist, Klaus Schwab, and go on down the list. So I know this is a complete rabbit hole, but all of this stuff.
No, it's not a
led
rabbit
up
hole.
to me being in this moment. So to go back to your initial question, this was not a planned situation. It's just like I saw something and I know I could do it, so I did it.
So yeah, no. If first, it's not a rabbit hole. What we are faced with is a rabbit hole, a very high level, sophisticated, intergenerational, global politics rabbit hole, and it's meant to feel like an insurmountable obstacle. It's meant to feel like something so big that you should dare not even speak about it. And I went through a similar thing in my congressional race against Ilhan Omar, where I was unsuccessful, much like your situation, got railroaded by the establishment Republicans in the primary race against somebody who was actually receiving funding and support from the same exact people who support and fund Ilhan Omar. So I mean that shows you the power of the uniparty right there. And people like you and I say uniparty. And if you get your politics with your French fries or from Taco Bell or from your horoscope meme or from Joy Ann Reid or Rachel Maddow, you'll hear uniparty and think that it's just right-wing conspiracy. But there are people out there who understand elite DC politicians have been reaching across the aisle or under the table for a long time in a corrupt manner to undermine the power of the citizens and having a fair election process and ultimately righteous governance. I want to switch gears a little bit, just a little bit, but stay down the road here of globalism. Growing up in Michigan obviously is one of the jewels of American history in terms of manufacturing, especially from the automotive industry, but also during World War II, a lot of our military equipment, a lot of our military prowess came from Michigan as well. Being somebody who grew up in Michigan and saw how Michigan's manufacturing base was destroyed across a number of years or diminished, and the influx of crime and drugs that coincided it. Speak a little bit about you. I mean, you mentioned the CCP and you mentioned China, and for Black people in this country to mention China is like taboo. I mean, it's almost like something that we shouldn't either even bother ourselves with because white cops mean to hunt us down and shoot us, which is absolutely absurd, but that's the narrative that we're told in our Marxist elementary schools. What was it like growing up in Michigan and seeing the decline of manufacturing in Michigan as a microcosm for the decline of manufacturing across the country? Were you aware of it? And when you became aware of it, what was that? And where do you stand today on American manufacturing and the influence of the CCP?
I remember after NAFTA was signed. This is what I said. I've always been political. I remember after NAFTA was signed, I have a family member who worked for an automotive supplier. I would never forget. And I went to like a work event they had. This is one of my relatives, and I was a kid. I was like 12 or 13. I was like 13 years old, and I had such a good time. And this family member of mine they were so excited. They had a really good job, and then shortly after NAFTA was signed, their company closed down and it was outsourced to Mexico because of NAFTA. And so we saw the decline in Michigan because it was really many layers going on because you had a lot of young men who grew up watching their fathers and grandfathers, have these steady, well-paying jobs at working in one of the factories, and they paid well. Like both of my grandfathers worked in factories, and they provided well for their families. So a lot of young men in my generation, at least growing up in Detroit, they didn't take their education as seriously because they didn't feel they needed post-secondary training. And I say post-secondary training for a reason because everybody doesn't need to go to college. For some people, a trade school or apprenticeship is the appropriate path. And I would tell it to my students all the time, like, whoever's making all this money from these college loans are involved in selling people a bill of goods that, if you don't go to colleges, you're not reaching your potential. It's like, well, that's not true. I had some students of mine, some of my young men students who could, take apart a car and build it up like that, like, quick. And I'm not mean literally, but you get the point of what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that particular area of interest did not require college education. And so I say all that to say that a lot of young men didn't take needing post-secondary training of any kind very serious because they were under the mindset, I'll just go work in a plant and be like my dad and granddad and I'll be fine. But then the reality was those jobs are not available because of outsourcing. So a lot of young men of my generation made decisions in high school based on a career that never would come to fruition. So then they were left scrambling, trying to find new opportunity. And because Michigan was so heavily automotive dependent, and those jobs left, that caused like a depression. And you watch towns like Pontiac, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, just crumble because those factories left. And one of the problems is when you have a city or a state dependent on one industry, there's other industries that depend on those industries. So, for example, if you have a town where there's a couple of factories that everybody works at, well, guess what's going to happen? People are going to live in those towns, so they're going to buy houses in those towns. They're going to go grocery shopping in those towns. They're going to go to restaurants and clothing stores and restaurant. You get what have you. So there's an entire economy that's built around the success of the factory that everybody works for. But then when that factory goes out of business, or they're doing layoffs, well, guess what? That man can't take his wife to buy a nice dress. That mother can't take her son to go pick up new football cleats. Those types of things, those luxuries, quote unquote, are no longer available. So the ancillary businesses that depend on that strong center start to close up shop. And
They
so then
leave
the
too.
town
Yeah.
crumbles. And I know that was a long story, but just to provide a detailed explanation of what kind of happened to our state. So then a
Yeah.
lot of industries start to leave. We've lost the congressional district seat over the last 10 years because many millennials have picked up and left. Because unless you're an engineer or something in automotive, I mean, it's very difficult to find opportunity in Michigan. It's just not. We don't have a lot of industry, even though our state could. We got so much potential. It's a beautiful state, but it just lacked. And so I've watched this happen where many of my peers got up and left. It's like a brain drain. That's something people don't think about when you have a lot of people immigrate from other countries, and you don't think about the impact it has on the countries that they left. Because what happens is the type of fortitude to get up, leave your country, make a difficult journey to come to a new country, learn a language, adjust to a different culture. That takes a lot of resolve and a lot of resilience. And those types of characteristics are oftentimes necessary, not oftentimes, they're all the time necessary to achieve high levels of success and build up a society. Well, if
Yeah.
the people with the strongest resolve get up and lead a country, then that means that the best and the brightest of their country have gone. So there is the brain drain that happened. Oftentimes, the best and brightest get up and lead their country. The same is true for a state. So our state experienced the brain drain, no innovation, and then it was like we call it a lost decade in our state. Now, we had a governor who came in who claimed he was going to bring our state back, but he was just as terrible and put a retirement tax on us. But I digress. Now, our new governor, Gretchen Whitmer, she's a globalist. I mean, she's over at Davos. I mean, we got two World Economic Forum offices by my house. My county is actively implementing Agenda 2030. We got all these things going on. We got a CCP Ford Motor Company and a CCP company are building a battery factory that we're trying to stop. So the globalists have their tentacles knee deep in Michigan. So you have a lot of these politicians that want to point like, oh, Michigan is on the rise. Yeah, but what are the pillars under the rise? And it's globalism. So that's terrifying. So, watching all this happen, and the frustrating part, you try to explain these things to people and they just try to paint you like you're nuts. It's just like, no, just read their books. Like if you read their articles, read their white papers, I mean, they say what they're going to do. I'm just reporting the facts.
Talk a little bit about Agenda 2030. Why does it worry you I mean, obviously, for the layperson out there who's in Michigan, who's in Minnesota, who's anywhere in the country, because there are a lot of people who hear of the World Economic Forum, they hear a word like globalism. The Washington Post tells them that globalism is some dog whistle for anti-Semitism, which is completely ridiculous. But there's a protection around any dialogue about globalism itself. So people hear about these things, but your average person kind of feels disconnected from the ramifications of it. Talk a little bit about Agenda 2030, what it plans to do, what it openly talks about doing there in Michigan, and why you and others there in Michigan are fighting back against it.
Yeah, so you can take a step back to Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was really the same concept, but it just didn't come into fruition for the United Nations. And they claim it's their sustainability goals where they want to eradicate poverty, eradicate hunger, fix all these societal problems. And for the average person, you're like, well, I think that's great. Are you opposed to eradicating hunger? Are you opposed to eradicating violence? Are you opposed to eradicating these things? But then what happens is that when they claim to try to eradicate these things, they in reality engage in actions that suppress or go against my constitutional rights. And they actually go to take away personal freedoms, because the only way I can guarantee your success is to take away any power you have to make choices. And I have to have absolute control over you like a robot and demand you make certain decisions. But then also what they do is they take away things. So let's say you worked really hard, you made really good decisions, and they take away the things you've earned, saying, well, we need to give to somebody else so they're not hungry. But the problem is whenever the government does that, they always take a nice fat portion for themselves. And then the person they claim they want to help, they only give them peanuts. So now both of y'all poor while the government is growing and riches. What also they're pushing for, carbon to be carbon neutral and these
Yeah.
various things. When you look at the push to be carbon neutral, you have to ask yourself, what's one of the biggest producers of carbon, CO2? That's us. Just look at Bill Gates' speech, Innovating Zero, where he claimed he want to lower the human population by 10 to 15%. I mean, the only way you can be net zero in your carbon is wiping off some people. I mean, that's
Killing
just the
people.
fact.
Yep.
And so if you go and read what they're trying to accomplish, they also want to do away with gas powered vehicles, which I have a big problem with. These electric vehicles, especially in Michigan, and I know also in Minnesota, those are not even wise decisions to have those types of vehicles because the batteries drain very quickly in cold weather. They're also trying to push these 15-minute cities where all of us live in, where we're 15 minutes walking distance from everything we need. You have companies like BlackRock who are buying up property and things of that nature because the goal is to push everybody into cities. So if you want to read Agenda 2030 or learn about it, the premise is taking away choice, total government control, and that way they make all your decisions for you in order to have a society that's free of war, violence, poverty. It's a one world government. That's what it is. And The reason why they call people like us conspiracy theorists and all these other insulting names is because the more people who find out about it, that means that's more people to fight them. So of course, if I can, I don't. What's easier to defeat my enemy mentally or physically? Well, mentally, because if I come at you with a weapon, that's an obvious threat. You're going to fight back. But if I just come and try mind control, manipulation, brainwashing, and those are the tactics, most people are going to fall for it, especially because it's been weaved into our media and entertainment to desensitize people to certain concepts. That way, you'll readily accept it when politicians come pushing it. So, I know it's complicated and it's intended to be complicated because these people are evil, not stupid. So, it's a very complicated thing. And just read their writings. Read it for yourself. You look at the World Economic Forum there, and whether it's the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, or United Nations, all three are in cahoots.
What
They're
what
all in cahoots.
how did you feel this week, I think in the last few days, and this announcement was made? And understand, if you've been watching the show and these episodes, Kristina and I just connected. We come from the same cloth. We come from the same spirit around these politics. We come from the same nationalist populist mindset, but we just connected. We didn't even have a pre-interview and talk about these things for the most part. And if you've been watching my episodes, this is exactly in alignment with what we've been talking about so far in the first ten or so episodes. Um, what te- you know, this announcement was what made a while back, but it was supposedly ratified in the last few days, in the last week, for the WHO to take executive authority over all countries who opt into the health emergency crisis treaty. How do you what do you make of that? I mean, I don't even need to ask, but where is your mind? I mean, now you're the Republican chair there in Michigan, and you're going to have a huge hand in the candidates that run, the support that the Republican Party gives candidates at the grassroots level and all around the state of Michigan, as well as outside of the state of Michigan. Obviously, a battleground state there coming up in 2024. What we talk about local politics so much, and I think you make a great point that it's intended to feel complicated because these people are evil, not stupid. The WHO having control, superseding our Constitution in times of medical emergency. What does this signal for somebody like you who's in a position, a newly appointed position of power there in the state of Michigan? What are you trying to tell your citizens there in the state of Michigan about these global agencies? And are you having success? Or do people seem like they're open to hearing about how these organizations plan to take advantage of them?
Well, one of the things we're going to do is be working to really educate people because, to your point, I was the kind of person that would like just scream and yell and go like, "Are y'all stupid? Y'all don't see what's happening?" But I've come to learn as you get older and you get more mature that I how do I say this? I've learned that unfortunately it seems like it's very easy for these individuals to trick people, but it's hard to convince people they've been tricked.
Mm.
Convincing people they've been tricked is very difficult to do because you get into pride, you get into set beliefs. I don't want to admit I've been tricked. People don't want to get into all, they don't want to deal with all of these things. So for me, um, you know, when I hear those things and to try to educate people, that's going to be where we begin and learning how to meet people where they are. Because I look at my life and why I've drawn these conclusions, and I can sit back and identify kind of when we first opened the show, and you asked me about my background, and I began with my mother, who taught me to question everything. So if you take a person who was raised to ask questions, and then my father would take me to bookstores to those things together created natural curiosity. So when you tell me something that seems a little strange, I'm like, well, why? Why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do with this information? Who are you? What are your sources? Most people don't process that way. And
Mm.
so I've learned to be more empathetic and saying we need to really teach people how to be discerners of information. And so if we teach people how to be discerners of information, then they're going to be less likely to be manipulated. That's what we want to do. It's not that I want people to follow Christina. I want people to be savvy. That way they don't get manipulated. And if we
Mhm.
can empower people to not be manipulated, that's how we fight back. Because the issue you're talking about regarding the World Health Organization, um, they have no constitutional authority to do that. So this is going to be a bunch of lawsuits. And if they try coming to, going in states to implement their agenda, that's not going to go well for them at all. Number one, this is why it's important to get involved in local elections. Local elections are so important because your county sheriff can tell a Fed to pound sand. Your state can tell the federal government to pound sand. So if we have strong states, they can sign whatever they want to do, but it's not going to work because the states will resist them. That's why states' rights are so important. This is also why our Second Amendment rights are so important. And people don't like to think of it in that context. But today, myself and a few legislatures, we held a press conference speaking about the importance of our Second Amendment rights.
Mhm.
And the reason why our Second Amendment rights exist is not to hunt. It's not in case a robber breaks in my house. It's to put a healthy fear in aspiring tyrants that they know that if they try something horrible, there's an armed population. And we in America have fooled ourselves into thinking like it can never happen here. Tell that to the Jews who lived during the Holocaust, and the
Mhm.
list goes on of atrocities. Our team during the SOS race, we did a video where people from former communist countries, a lady from Cuba, a couple from Czechoslovakia, and two women from China, to show that tyrants, I don't care where they are in the world, tyrants operate the same. And so we wanted to convey that to people to make that point that our Second Amendment rights are so critical. They're not for offensive purposes, they're for defensive purposes. So if you put all this stuff together, we're really trying to educate people that way they can kind of come to these conclusions naturally instead of me just trying to ram it down their throat. That way, irrespective of the information thrown before them, just processing the information, they'll come to the conclusion that these certain groups are dangerous, these certain policies are important to protect, especially our Second Amendment rights. That's all. When you mentioned the World Health Organization and that whole, because I've been so focused on state politics, but
Yeah.
all I keep thinking is Second Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights. They don't want an armed population because if you have an armed population, that kind of stuff is not going to fly.
Yeah, and the global affects the local. When I ran my campaign against Ilhan Omar, I tried to stress everywhere I could that the global affects the local, and we see that this sort of globalist agenda, especially from a corporate standpoint or an economic standpoint, certainly has huge ramifications on us locally in our communities. But another place where it has huge ramifications is culturally, socially. You're a mother,
Mhm.
and you have two children growing up there in public school, I would assume, or private school there in Michigan. Not sure.
Public. Mhm.
Okay, in public school. Mine are in public school as well here in Minnesota. Um, talk that there is the economic initiatives coming from Davos and the globalist agenda, and then there are these sort of uh, COVID, times of crisis, emergency authority agendas coming from Davos during and the globalist agenda. But what about our young people's education? And this week, you come on at a great time. I saw a number of videos pop up this week that I posted on Twitter, both of which both of which show a group of adults in a room with a young child, an underage child, but a very young child at that, demonstrating LGBTQ, or more specifically transgender, drag shows, stripper shows, things of this nature. And I mean, I don't even have to ask whether you think it's right or wrong. And the biblical worldview tells you enough there. I mean, it's just completely off the rails. But even from a governance standpoint, and see, I make the case because I'm a Christian, and the automatic response to you and I will be, well, you want a theocracy, right?
Mhm.
And it's so interesting because when you look at the countries who we are now engaged in a war with, we are engaged in two global superpower wars, one being Russia and the other being China. And I don't care what people say. We're at war with China right now, whether people want to believe it or not. And the guns are being loaded. And pretty soon that one will be too far gone, in my opinion. But our opponents on the world stage are not lukewarm or wishy washy about this LGBTQ issue when it comes to their children and the future of their nation and the ability to protect the sovereignty or the power of their country or military around these issues. Where are you at as the chair there in Michigan? I'm sure this LGBTQ issue comes up, and what do you make of what's happening in our schools right now? And tell a young black woman like yourself who came up going to borders. I resonate with that because I'm from Minnesota, so we had borders here too. And my mother used to. My mother was a single mother, but she used to take me to borders as well. So I spent time there when I was growing up, and it had a similar effect on me that it had on you, where you have that natural curiosity and desire to question. Um, you grew up that way. We have young kids today that are growing up completely immersed in a cultural narrative around being sapiosexual or pansexual or gender non-binary or queer theories or any number of pronoun etiquettes and things like that coming straight from their teachers. As a mom in this country, let alone a politician, what do you make of how we're teaching our children these days?
Well, there's the spiritual, and then there's the political agenda, the agenda to deconstruct the human family. It goes hand in hand with abortion. Either you stop children from being created, or you kill them once they've been created. It's just kind of really that simple.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we live in a society where that's one hand to it, right? But there's multiple layers. The other layer of it is when you take a society and you pull it down the rabbit hole of sexual depravity. Um, it deconstructs the human family, which kids get something unique from a mother and something unique from a father. Now, like you said before, we get accused of having a theocracy, wanting a theocracy. That's not true. Number one, even in most Christians, we can't even agree on theology, let alone to try to have a government ruling over us, Christian government. That's ridiculous. And it's not even biblical, because we're supposed to choose to follow Christ. We choose to follow him. If you're forced to follow
Amen.
him, it's not genuine because somebody made you do it. So let's just get that out of the way. This is just what I personally believe. However, when we see schools teaching children to explore sexuality, it creates all kind of mental and emotional issues, because these aren't issues that children are really ready to deal with. Those aren't desires that should be awakened, because what can they do with it besides cause problems in their lives? I'm concerned with the transgender movement in children, even though I don't think adults should do it. God made us the way He made us, and I don't think we should be cutting off our body parts. But at the same time, people have a right to do with their lives what they want. But the concern for me is children. It's really terrifying, because you have a lot of kids who I saw a video of this man discussing how he knew at 24 months what he thought was his son was a girl. I mean, what a twisted and wicked, evil man. And he just think because he's talking with a soft voice and he sounds friendly and it sparkles in the background, that he's doing his son a favor. It's like you are ruining him physically. None of us know the long-term effects of these children taking puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy. None of us. You cannot conduct clinical trials on children. It is illegal. Since we can't conduct clinical, well, stuff being illegal doesn't mean it stops some of people in our government. So there's
No
that. But
doubt. No doubt.
yeah, but the thing about it is we have no idea the long-term consequences that this treatment will have on our children, not just physical but psychological. And not to be gross, but I've heard of situations where when these kids start very young, they grow up with deformed reproductive organs. So now you're sterilizing these children. I mean, come on,
Mm.
Royce. I'm sure when you were a kid, you thought you were Batman or something. We all did. I used to love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I wanted to be a Power Ranger. Kids are not in the position to make those types of decisions. So now you mean to tell me that somebody who's 6 years old can make the decision that they want to permanently alter themselves forever and be sterile? And one of the things that's scary is that if a child, by these people's logic, can't consent to getting their genitals altered permanently, how can one logically say a child can't consent to sex? And if you notice in these camps where they pushing for child transgenderism, they also believe that children can consent to sexual acts because they believe children are sexually autonomous. So, for example, in Michigan, we just had Proposition 3 passed where it does make it legal for a child to get transgender treatment without parental consent.
Mm.
So why else would these people want to sexualize young children? Again, it's the degradation of society. There's a spiritual reality. This is a fall of a civilization, which we're trying to stop. But then there's also for the globalists, you deconstruct the human family, and we're these silos that can be controlled. So we just had, and this is where I call on the church to step up, because this is where churches got to step up, not government. It's not the job of government to fix these issues. I remember I gave a speech a couple years ago, and I cited a statistic where 60% of people claim to be Christian. That's not true, because if it was true, our society would not look anything like this. So that is not the job of the government to fix, because if our society really was 60% Christian, many of these things would not even occur.
Amen.
So the churches are
Amen.
the ones who are supposed to step up and solve these issues, not government. But it's terrifying. Our kids are being sexually confused, and it's going to cause all types of human family issues. But also, people don't talk about the mental health issues, because when you got 8 and 9 year olds exploring their sexuality, these kids are not mentally ready to handle the consequences with sexual activity and all those surrounding issues. So they start having mental and emotional problems. They're doing things they have no business doing, and it causes so many other psychological issues that people don't want to address. I mean, this is a whole nother show in itself, and it's not to be mean or harsh. It's because these are children. Let them be kids. And if that's what
Yeah.
somebody wants to do as an adult, I don't think the government should stop them. I think it's the job of the church to speak the truth of the gospel, that hoping those individuals will choose different.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think it's a herald of bad times ahead for sure. When a society has so much to consider, so much to try and figure out in terms of economy, basic what do you want to call it, infrastructure, the overall health of our institutions, the credibility of our institutions, the competition of science on the world stage, and all these other things that we have to worry about going forward. And yet the premium has been placed on this sort of LGBTQ movement so heavily. Um, it's concerning. It's concerning to say the least.
Yeah.
Also, I want to move to the most electrifying man in politics today, Donald Trump himself. And here we have there's an article here from, I think this was Newsweek, I want to say. And in Newsweek it says, I want to read this for you. Kristina Karamo, the Republican nomination for Michigan's Secretary of State, has been found to have a number of wild claims, including describing abortion as a satanic practice, which is just true, and the suggestion that demonic possession can be sexually transmitted. I actually love that. That's great. Karamo. uh, that's actually true and hilarious all at the same time. Karamo, who has the backing of Donald Trump to oversee election policies in the state, made a number of controversial statements in her "It's Solid Food" podcast, which have been unearthed by CNN. In one October 2020 remark, Karamo described abortion as nothing new, before claiming it's similar to a satanic ritual. Okay, yeah. The Newsweek obviously is going to deny that there's any presence of Satan whatsoever in the world, which is not by accident or not a coincidence.
It's
Donald
it,
Trump.
mhm.
Donald Trump supported you in your Secretary of State bid. Talk a little bit about what it's been like to be a black woman in America that has been aligned with MAGA and Donald Trump in the public, and what it is that you saw in President Trump that drew you to him, and what was it like to get his support in your race, And where do you stand now going forward in 2024? If you can speak on 2024, I won't hold you to that because that's a whole different ball game. But those two things first, and just where you at now on Donald Trump, and it is obviously, and I ask because obviously he's under fire still. I mean, they won't let that go. Now they want to put him in jail. I mean, that we all saw that coming. More kangaroo courts, politically motivated kangaroo courts, and even more so, the Republican establishment, which I'm sure you know well,
Mhm.
uh, in the insider baseball, are all pitching to govern from the center. They all are blaming Donald Trump and saying that these MAGA Republicans, these extremists, these conspiracy theorists are why we lost the 2022 midterms, so on and so forth. Where are you at on Trump and 2024?
So let me first get to the one thing you commented about the satanic. When I mentioned about abortion being a satanic.
Satanic STDs. Okay.
Yeah, listen,
Okay.
the Satanic Temple has on their website that abortion is a sacrament. This is what they have it on their website. They said abortion is a sacrament, and there's actually some abortion clinics for Satanists to offer their child as a sacrifice to Satan. I'm just saying what they did. Now, as it
Mm.
comes to 2024, actually, I can't comment because with me being state party chair, I have to remain neutral as part of our bylaws. So,
Ah.
but I will say, so I got to access. It's my job. But I will
Yeah.
say, when in terms of what attracted me to the MAGA movement and what keeps me supporting that movement is really that it's about putting America first. I mean, it's really kind of a simple concept. I remember while I was a student at Biola, I had a classmate from India, and he commented in one of our sessions, like, "What's wrong with putting your country first? Like, shouldn't all leaders put their citizens first? I mean, how is that such a bad thing?" So these people actually expose themselves because they're globalists. And
Yeah.
that's just it. So they don't like an America First message because it gets in the way of the uniparty's little game. And so that's one of the things that really attracted me to that movement. It's simply just it's something so simple, just making sure that public policy puts the well-being of American citizens before anything else.
Mm.
We talked earlier about globalism, but it's not just globalism. Our state and nation is being ran by a criminal cartel that exists within both parties. You have a band of criminals who arguing in front of us, high five and drink together behind the scenes. And these individuals, for a myriad of reasons, whether it's their, let me take a step back. I always say there's five groups of people in politics. You have patriots, and this is irrespective of political party too. You have patriots, people who genuinely love their country. You have people who are cowards. They won't stick up for truth. They just do whatever they feel they can what gives them best cover. Then you have people who are political prostitutes. They go anyway. The second group, they want to stand up, but they're scared. The group number three, they don't care. Whoever helps them get fame and glory and money, that's where they go. Then you got group four, which I think is a big chunk of these people. They're blackmailed. Blackmail in politics is the most powerful currency. And I don't like to toot my horn. I don't think to see myself as being nothing special. I'm a slave to Christ, right? That's the way I see myself. But one of the reasons why these people hate me so bad is because as Christians, you can't blackmail us.
Mm.
We're not out there doing reckless things that nobody has me on camera, doing or saying anything strange. So you can't blackmail me. I don't commit crimes. You can't blackmail me. So many of our politicians, they do things and we'll go, wow. Like for Michigan, we had a Speaker of the House. Now, this is Mr. Faith, Family, and Freedom. Mr. Christian, khaki pants, hair parted to the side. You know the type I'm talking about, right? Mr. Christian. And this guy, after the 2020 election, he was doing things that just made no sense. We're like, what is wrong with him? Like, why is he not speaking up? Like, why? We're telling him this is our Republican Speaker of the House. Why is he not pushing back? So then we see Jocelyn Benson, who was my opponent in 2022. She was live on CNN and she goes, "Oh, I just got a text message from the Speaker of the House, and he said he doesn't know if he's going to see President Trump or not." So, why is our Republican Speaker of the House texting the Democrat Secretary of State that he doesn't know if he's going to go see the president or not? Why is he answering her questions like that? And even the CNN commentator was kind of taken back, and she was like, "Whoa, you mean the Republican Speaker of the House was texting you like live on air?" And she just kind of was like aghast. Well, last year, this story comes out where his little brother's wife is accusing him of raping her for a long period of time, like starting when she was a teenager, all during her adulthood, while she was married to his younger brother. Now it's bad enough. We heard the story like that. They were like he was sleeping with his sister-in-law, which is horrible enough. But his little brother's wife, but it gets worse that she's accusing him of rape. But here's the well, at least we know that they were sleeping together, and he said, well, it was consensual. Time out, time out. You claim to be a Christian. Your father's a pastor, and you have at best admitted to having sex with your brother's wife. Like that
Mm,
is trifling. And
mm,
she claims that it started when she was in high school while she was still a student. But it gets worse. His brother admits to driving him around while he was Speaker of the House to strip clubs, to these various women's houses to have sex. And he's supposed to be Mr. Like I said, faith, family, freedom, khaki pants, side part. You get the point. He missed a perfect Christian. And at best, he was a serial womanizer. At worst, he was raping his brother's wife. Why is this relevant? Because that's the kind of person they love in politics. He has these
mm,
horrible vices.
mm,
And that person you can control. They will
mm.
do whatever you say. And then the fifth person in politics is the globalists. They're the traitors to the republic. And so sometimes it can be difficult to identify which of the five people are, but you know them by their fruit. And I say all that to say that the populist movement, the MAGA movement, that's what it was all about, and that's why it grew so popular because it was all about putting America first. We're done with these crooked politicians, these self-serving jerks. We just want people who are going to get in office and put America first. That's what it boils down to. And so the populist movement is growing. It's going to grow more. It's not going to stop because I've encountered people during the 2022 election who were traditionally Democratic, who were moving to what you would call quote unquote to the right. It's not so much to the right. People are just moving right on the common sense. That's what it boils down to. And so that movement is not going to stop because more and more people are starting to see the Uniparty for what it is, and they will be exposed, and we will defeat them.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. Well, thank you, Christina Karamo, for joining us today. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it. I want to have you back when you have time. I know you're busy there in the great state of Michigan, preparing all of the soldiers to defend the future of this country, and nobody better than you to do it. You are all inspiring to say the least. I'm excited to know you. I'm glad that you had a chance to stop by the show today and share with our listeners your story and your views on what's happening in the world today and in this country. Good luck to you. Good luck to
thank
you
you.
with the new position. I know it's going to be an adjustment period, and you're going to have to clean house some and repair some other things and get the house in order there. But we
Mhm.
support you, and we are looking forward to seeing what you do there in the great state of Michigan as the new Republican chair, the chair of the Republican Party. Um, Godspeed to you. The fight continues. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Royce. God bless you. Thank you for having me on.